Good morning, my dear students. Welcome to Azra Bazaz's Knowledge Corner. Today we'll be starting a new lesson in history, Making of the Global World. As the name suggests, making of the global world. See, today's world that we are living is complex, and it is mainly because of trade and commerce. So today the food we eat, the cultural practices that we have, all this is a fusion of various cultures and traditions, and this has been possible only because of trade. Now take for example the noodles that you eat. Do you know where it originated? Some say it originated in Saudi Arabia. Some say it originated in China. And from there it went to Italy and became pasta. The simple potato, the Portuguese brought it to India when they came to India, and they introduced it as batata. And the simple cup of tea that we have, few 100, 200 years ago, I think our forefathers had never tasted tea. It was introduced to us by the British. So in this lesson, we will be studying the various cultural differences, the fusion of various cultures and practices that we have come forward because of trade and commerce. Now, basically, the vibrancy of trade was more pronounced in the Indian Ocean. Asia and Europe were the two continents where trade existed. Now, from India and China, spices, silk, then muslin, indigo, and basically the most important commodity that traveled from these two countries, especially from China, was silk. And it traveled to Europe. The other commodities like indigo, muslin, spices, tea, porcelain, all these also traveled. But silk was the monopoly of China, and it was very costly commodity. And that's the reason the land routes through which these commodities traveled is known as silk routes. Now, along with these silk routes, food also traveled. And food traveled so much so that when potato was introduced in Ireland, it became so common with the lower strata of the society that when there was a potato famine in round about 1845 to 1849, the crops of potato which failed led to starvation deaths. You can understand how a simple potato, not availability of the simple potato, led to starvation deaths in Ireland. See, that is what we are going to study in this lesson. Now you'll be thinking about Africa. Africa was a dark continent. People were scared. There were horror stories of the forests there, and all. People thought there were ferocious animals and all that. But still, slave trade existed. Why? Because the monarchs in Europe encouraged the slave trade because they got a cut in the profits of the slave trade. And the Africans were kidnapped from the shores of Africa and sold in Europe as slaves. See, here you can see the picture how they were well dressed, and they have been given a bath, and they have been dressed up like Englishmen, and then they are sold as commodities in the market. Now, 19th century saw a change in the world trade setup. There was a flow of trade, flow of labor, and flow of movement of capital. Previously, the flow of trade was confined to the boundaries of the country. But now, it started moving to other countries as well. It started leaving the shores of the main country itself. Now, when there was a flow of trade, naturally there was opportunity for the labor also to find work across the seas. And when there was trade and labor, the capital was needed. So the capital started moving from the confines of the country's boundaries. Now you will see when these things happened, When these things started taking shape, explorations also started taking place. Now, where China and India, the traders from India and China used to come towards the Balkans, and there used to be an exchange of goods at Constantinople. When the Ottoman Turks took over Constantinople, they introduced huge amount of taxes, which was not acceptable to the Indian and the Chinese traders. And that's the reason they stopped coming. Now, Europe had developed a taste for spices. So the king and the spice trade was a flourishing, booming $1 billion trade. So the monarchs encouraged the discovery of new sea routes to India. Magellan had proved that the world is round. So Columbus, what he did was he decided to cross the Atlantic and reach India and China after crossing the Atlantic. He thought that if he would cross the Atlantic, he would reach the countries of India and China. But what did he know? Little did he know that when he would cross the Atlantic, he would discover a new continent. It took a sail. When he landed at a group of islands, he thought he had reached India and he named it as Indies, and his sailors did not allow him to venture in. And he returned back. It took another sailor, Amerigo, who ventured far deep, and he discovered that Columbus had found a new continent itself, which was kept away from the continents of Europe and Asia. And that's the reason both the continents are named as Americas. Now, in those days, the voyages of discovery, the captain and his first officers were vaccinated, but the sailors were condemned prisoners, who had been given the death sentence. So they were not vaccinated. So they carried the disease of smallpox along with them. And with that, and the local population, tribal population in America had not developed immunity towards this, disease. And naturally, when the voyages of discovery, the sailors landed at these two continents were taken over without firing a shot. That is, the disease destroyed the local population, and America was taken over without firing a shot because of this one, the disease smallpox. Just like John Winthrop has said, it was biological warfare. Now, when the world economy started taking shape, food also started traveling. Now, when Industrial Revolution was taking shape in Europe, more and more people started moving towards the industrialized cities. So naturally, the agricultural, setup was coming down. The agricultural production in continent of Europe was coming down. And so Europe started depending on the new continent of America, then Australia, then Canada to a certain extent, but then Russia. So food started coming in from all these areas. But then the quality of food, the quality of agricultural produce was of a very best quality. Now, when the First World War came to an end, the remaining population who had survived the First World War in Europe came back to their original, work of agriculturists. Now, the large estate owners, they also grew corn, but the corn that was grown in England was not of a very good quality. And naturally, the corn which came in from Americas was of a very good quality and also cheap. And that's the reason they encouraged the government of England to impose a ban on the import of corn. When the ban was imposed, naturally, the demand for corn was high and the supply was less, and the prices rose. And the government had to hurriedly scrap the corn laws, and food could now be imported into Britain, which was cheaply produced, and British agriculture came to such a scene that it could no longer compete with the imports at all. Now, America was a land which was free for everybody. The local Aztec population, the Red Indians, all had been, because of the biological warfare, there was no local population left. In Europe, the norm was that if you take a loan and you are not able to repay the loan, you would be given the death sentence. Or if small crimes, you would be given a death sentence. So what the lower strata of the society started doing was they started fleeing towards America, where land was free. They started taking new names, new identities, and they cordoned off huge farmlands and they started producing agricultural produce. So that's the reason America is known as, the new world. People started moving towards. You see in the pictures here, the emigrant ship leaving for US by the pictures here, the paintings here, and even the emigrants waiting to board the ship. People were waiting to take new identities in the new world also. Now, global agricultural economy was taking shape. The labor movement was there, capital flows were there, ecologies and technology was taking shape. Food no longer came from a nearby town or a village. It came from across the seas also. Now, even in India, West Punjab, the most fertile land drained by 5 rivers, the British Indian government built a network of canals, irrigation canals, to convert the semi-desert waste into fertile agricultural land. And they named it as canal colonies. That's the reason, see, after independence, when Green Revolution wanted to take shape, the Indian government started from these canal colonies, and that's the reason Green Revolution was a success in India. Now, food production was merely an example. See now, even rubber. Kerala, if you go, you will see huge rubber plantations set up by the British because they needed good quality rubber for their industries in Europe. Now, technology has played a major role in transport of goods, especially agricultural produce, from one continent to another continent. Now, previously, what used to happen in Europe, the poor could afford only bread and water at night when their dinner table consisted of bread and water. But then, when potato was introduced, it increased the nutrition value of a poor man's table. Tea was out of bounds. It's one of the costliest things. Meat, poultry also was out of bounds because meat came in from other continents. The animals used to travel across high seas, especially from Australia and all that. Though they used to disembark, by the time they reached Europe, half of them were deceased or dead and naturally were of no use. So when refrigerated ships were being invented, the animals were slaughtered at their point of dispatch, and they were frozen. The frozen meat started reaching Europe. Now, the meat was now afforded by the lower strata of the society also, and which led to the increase in nutrition on the poor man's table. Now, Africa for long had not been colonized. As I told you, it was considered as a dark continent. But then, where the missionaries went, the traders followed. And when Africa, in every other continent of the world, land held power. But in Africa, animals were power. The tribal head owned large stocks of animals, that is cattle, goats and all that, and that decided his power. And naturally, when the traders wanted to venture, they offered gold for guides, but the tribal heads were not willing to even look into their demands. In order to feed the Italian soldiers in Egypt who had come to lay siege on Africa, cattle were brought in from Asia, which were infected with rinderpest. And rest is history. Africa, within a short span of time, All the cattle of Africa was infested with rinderpest, and once powerful tribal heads were reduced to penury, and they were ready to work for few pieces of factory manufactured cloth. And Africa, as you see here in the map, how it was divided into colonies, like even it was like Me Too policy. I too want, every country wanted a share in Africa. The continents of Africa and North America reduced the vibrancy of trade in Indian Ocean and increased the vibrancy of trade in Atlantic Ocean. Now, you all have studied about slave trade. Now, other than slave trade, India was under the British. The indentured labor was encouraged to migrate from India. In olden times, crossing the 7 seas was considered a bad omen by the Hindus in India. So they used to, it was frowned upon. So, but then the British employed their own agents, and these agents started painting a rosy picture by which they started giving a good picture that if the peasant would work in the Indies and all that as an indentured labor, he could pay off all the debts to the money lender and all that. So naturally, people from Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, Central Asia, India and all, they started moving towards Caribbean islands, mainly Trinidad, Guyana, Suriname, Mauritius, Fiji, and even Ceylon and Malaya. And you will see some of the names still, Indian names and all that. But once they would reach there, passports would be taken away, and sometimes they would be confined for a period of more than 5 years. But then once they would come back to India, but still over a period of time they had learned to settle down in the Caribbean islands. They had made Caribbean islands their home. So there was a fusion with various cultures, like basically the Muharram. Muharram is a festival of martyrdom. And in Caribbean islands, it became a riotous carnival called Jose. The fusion of Indian migrants, the music of Indian migrants with the others became chutney music. See, some of the cricketers, Indian cricketers in the West Indies, their names are Indian names and all that. So you will see that these are the descendants of Indian indentured labor who carried on settling in the Caribbean islands and never came back. Their forefathers who had gone from India, they never came back to India. Now, Indian entrepreneurs. The British depended on the Indian entrepreneurs. Indian banker, there was no written, on the stamp paper that you owe me money. It was all based on trust. Basically, the Shikaripuri Shroffs and the Nattukottai Chettiars, they were the bankers and traders who financed export agriculture in Central and Southeast Asia. They borrowed from the European banks, they funded the local export-import trade and all that. The Hyderabadi Sindhi traders, they ventured into the European colonies and all that. They set up handicraft, shops in most of the European colonies also. Now, if you look at Kashmir, basically has been a hub of handicrafts. The Kashmiri merchants, they started traveling towards Yarkand, Khotan, and Central Asia and all that, and they started exporting these Pashmina shawls. See, there is a name which is more pronounced here, Haji Mukhtar Shah Ashai, and many other travelers. They traveled towards Europe and they showcased these Pashmina shawls. It is said that when Napoleon married his second wife, he gifted her 17 Kashmiri Pashmina shawls. See, the value of the Pashmina shawl can be seen in during the colonial period. Now, Indian trade and global system. Basically, Indian textiles faced stiff competition. Where we had a monopoly of Indian textiles, now we started where India used to have a monopoly of cotton cloth. Because of industrial revolution in England, the demand for cotton cloth started declining over a period of time. And the raw material, India from an exporter of finished goods became an exporter of raw material. And this trade surplus, meaning India was a trade hub for the British Empire. Surat, Goa, Madras, Masulipatam, all Hooghly, these were the most important ports from which huge amount of agricultural raw material used to travel towards Europe and other British colonies, European colonies. And this helped to balance the British deficits, and India has played a crucial role in building the pensions for the British officials in India. We have finished the lesson Making of the Global World half. The other half I'll be completing in the second video. Have a great day, boys.